router. So now let's move on to the next transformation, that is expression transformation. Expression is the most widely used transformation. You can write anything and everything that can be possible with using expressions, functions, parameters, variables, constants, right? Anything. In order to write any customized transformation logic, any mathematical function, right? Some arithmetic operation, anything you need, we'll be able to do that with the help of expression transformation. So we used to write expressions using functions, parameters, variables, and as well constants. To talk about the properties of expression, this is a passive transformation, and when it comes to connectivity, this is a connected one itself. So passive means expression will not change any number of records. It won't filter out any records, it won't add any new records, right? The same number of incoming record count will be having the outgoing count as well. So that is the reason this is a passive transformation. Now, in expression transformation, we will see a new type of port. Port is nothing but column, right? In the earlier two transformations that we have discussed, filter and router transformations, we have seen that input and output ports. When you are creating router transformation, we have observed that there is an input group, and in this input group, we were not able to directly map the columns from it, right? We then had to create a filter group. Then we were able to get your output ports. You see here, as you can see on my screen, these are only input ports, right? From this port, we were not able to take out the column and map to the downstream object. Only from here we were able to do. Basically, these are your input ports. These are your output ports. Whereas coming to filter transformation, the port can be acting as both input and output. That means you can take into it and take out from it. How do I know that? By just looking at the transformation itself, whether it is an input or output port, or only input port or only output port. Look closely on this particular transformation. You see, for every column name, there is a black dot available on both the sides. If it is available on the left side, this is an input port. If the dot is available on the right side, it is an output port. So here you can see for filter, the dot is available on both the sides. That is the reason this is a both input and output port. You can even go to the filter inside, and here I indicates input and O indicates output. Now coming to router transformation. In here, if you observe, for the ports that are in input group, the dot is available only on the left side. That is the reason these can be only acting as input ports. We don't have the dot available on the right side. That means these are not output ports. So coming to the filter groups here, if you can observe. So here, the dot is available on the right side, right? So in here you can find these are your output ports and no input mark. That means we cannot drag and drop onto this group, right? Even if you drag and drop here, that will be created into here, not onto this particular port. So that means this is only an input group, this is only an output group. Whereas in filter, a particular column can be acting as both input and output. So basically, so far what we have seen is an input port and output port. Input means it is coming from your upstream object. Output means it is going into your downstream object. Now, in addition to your input and output ports, in Informatica expression transmission, we have an additional port called variable port. So input output are common across all the transmissions. Here we have a port called variable port, right? So when it comes to writing the expressions, right, writing your expressions, you can write in your variable port as well as output port, right? Expressions can be written in variable and output ports. And one more thing here, when we have these different types of ports available, certain orders that you need to keep these ports in. So order of ports should be input and then variable and then output. Okay? The order of ports should be input, output and variable. Sorry, input, variable and output. So why this is important, why the order is important, we'll see when we talk about that sample data flow diagram. And then before we go there, anything else pending? Yeah, variable ports can't be directly mapped out. Okay, variable ports cannot be directly mapped out of the transmission to any downstream object. So we always need to take the value of variable port as part of an output port. Then only we'll be able to take out that particular value to any downstream object. Okay, so let's see the data flow diagram for this one. Right, now observe here, I have a requirement like I'm processing the source data to target both the columns. In addition, there is something like record ID or something like that I need to generate, basically a sequence number. Okay, this is the requirement. So in order to generate this customized column, I'm using an expression transmission here, and in expression transmission, I'm creating an additional two ports, one a variable port, another one an output port. Whereas these two will be both input and output, right? You are getting from your input and giving out your output. In order to get an additional derived column here for the sequence number, first of all, I'm creating a variable port and then output port. So the logic that I have written for variable port is, whenever the control reaches this particular point here, it needs to increment the value by 1 and assign the new incremented value. Okay. So variable port name is vcount. So I'm writing the logic saying that vcount plus 1 should be assigned to your count value. And then when it comes to the output port, whatever the value that I am calculating here, vcount, is simply assigned to your output port from there to target. As I mentioned, as we cannot map variable ports directly to any downstream object, that was the reason we were taking the value of vcount into an output port, and so that we can map this particular port to your target column. So this is the configuration that I have done here in the expression transmission. Let's start processing the data. So as we have seen, the transmission happens record by record. So the first record is coming from the columns. So both the columns has come in. Now the control is at the variable port. The expression that we have written for variable port is to increment the value by 1 and assign that new incremental value to this port. So we are processing the very first record. That means we haven't calculated any vcount as of now. Right? So in that case, integration service will consider the default value as your current value. Okay. In order to do this incremental operation, that is v count plus 1, what it should do, it should take the current value of v count. On top of that, it needs to increment. But as we are crossing the record for the first time, there is no current value. In that case, it will consider the default value, which is 0, and on top of that, it will increment. So for our understanding, I'm just keeping this as 0 plus 1, which is nothing but 1. So now, the v count value is 1. Then the control is reaching your output port, wherein we are doing a simple assignment of v count value to outcome. So here, the v count by this time is already 1, right? It has got already incremented. So basically 1 is now going into your outcome. So now, when you process this record further, that record that is reaching your target is this one, right? You have mapped your output port to your recording. Similarly, the next record is coming in. Now, for the second record, again when the control reaches the v count calculation. Now at this point of time, what is your v count value? The current value of v count 1. On top of that, it has to increment. So it is 1 plus 1. That means, so the new v count is 2 by this time. Similarly, now by the time control reaches your output port, it is 2, which is assigned to your output port, and simply going to that. So what do we observe here? The behavior of variable port. It is used to store the value temporarily during your runtime. Okay, it is used to store the value temporarily during your runtime. So it is the variable concept here is similar to the variables of any programming language, right? We declare some variables which are to be used during runtime. So similarly, again, if I process third record also, it will be like 2 plus 1, and the new incremented value is 3, and so on. So that means by the end of all the 6 records, we'll end up getting the sequence number 1 to 6. So this is how the concept of variable ports and output ports work. We can write any arithmetic operations or mathematical functions, or even the bunch of internal functions that we have used that are available in the expression editor. All those can be used to write your customized transformation logic and get it to your target. Now here, we have talked about a point saying that the order of ports is to be followed properly, otherwise your output will be affected. In here, if you observe, I have taken first input ports and then the variable port and then the output port. Let's see if I change this order, if I'll get the same output what we have got earlier. Okay. So now what I'm doing is, first I'm taking input ports and then I'm taking output port and then variable port. Okay, I'm changing order here. So now let's process the data with this arrangement. So first record again coming, and then we immediately have the output port, right? So as of now, as is the very first record, that means there is no current value for v count, and then it happens to consider the default value as your v count current value. So default value 0 is considered, and then that 0 is assigned to your output port. And then after that, the control is now coming to v count, and then it performs the incremental value 0 plus 1. But which particular port that is your mapping to target? Output port, right? So it happens that the value that is reaching your target is 0 for the first record. Similarly, for the second record, when it comes, immediately O count is there. The current value of V count at this point of time is 1, and then the increment is happening at your variable port. And the column that we are mapping to target is output port, so the sequence number happens to be generated 1 this time. So by the end of processing all the 6 records, we'll get the sequence number generated as 0 plus 0 to 5. But our expectation was to be generated something like 1 to 6. So what do we observe here? There is a data discrepancy happening when you change the order of your ports. Okay. So the placement of these ports should be proper when you are dealing with variable and output ports in your expression transformation in order to get the expected output data, right? So that's expression transformation. Let's go ahead and create a mapping for this one. So I'll bring in the employee source and target, and let me create expression transformation from the toolbar itself. So this time I do not want to populate all the source to target columns. I'll just bring some selective columns. Employee number, maybe salary and commission. And now let's open expression to add our required additional ports. Go to ports tab. In here you can see there is an additional port type indicator saying that variable or local variable. So I'll add ports. You see there is an add new port option. You can add, let's say I'll add one port. I would like to calculate total salary, and then let's try the same count functionality using a variable port and then an output port. So total salary, I'm marking it as an output port, so I'm disabling input option. Variable count, I would like to have it as variable port, so I'll enable V here. Row count, I would like to have this output port, so I disable it I here. When you mark input port, that means you are expecting the data coming from your upstream object. So basically you need to map that column from any upstream component. When you mark these output ports, that means you are generating from this point onwards. So that is the reason. You see the expression column here. The expression column is enabled for only those ports that are either output ports or variable ports. So that was the point that we have mentioned here, saying that expressions can be written in variable or output ports only, but not for input ports. So I am going to open the expression editor for total salary calculation. So click on this. We'll get the same editor what we have been seeing in the earlier couple transformations as well. So we can write any transformation logic here, any arithmetic operation. You can also leverage the usage of all these functions as well. So what I will do is I will do a simple summation of salary plus commission columns. You can make sure the column names that you are entering is proper by looking at the ports tab. Now here my source employee table is having some null values in my commission column. So obviously when you are doing an arithmetic operation, nulls will not behave properly in an arithmetic operation. So instead what I wanted to do is, when there is a null, I would like to consider that as a 0, okay, so that I can do a proper summation. So I'll write that null handler here saying that if is null of this commission column, consider it as 0, otherwise take the value that is available in commission. So I'm basically using two built-in functions, one is if function and another one is null function. As I mentioned, all these functions are available here itself in the list, the if, is null, is spaces and so on. Most of the syntaxes are similar to Oracle function syntaxes. So if you are familiar with database knowledge, that will be a little bit helpful. So now we are doing a simple summation, salary plus commission, just that for commission I am writing a null handler. So as I mentioned earlier, whenever you write something in the editor, make sure you validate so that you won't have any syntactic errors. So this is good here. So I've written the calculation for total salary. And then let's now try the same example what we have seen in the data flow diagram. So V count, I'll open the editor for this one. So I'll do a simple summation on top of the existing value. Alright, so again validate. And coming to output port here, open the editor. I'd like to simply take the value of variable port. So go to ports tab to take this port value. You don't need to put any equal operator or anything like that. Just put the column name. Again validate and done. So that's it. I've added 3 ports. Total salary I have taken directly as an output port and doing a calculation directly in the output port itself. Why? Because here I don't need to store any values temporarily during runtime, right? But when it comes to count, I need to increment the count on my earlier record count value, right? So that is the reason I had to store the earlier record value in a temporary variable, and we are using the variable port concept. But when it comes to total salary, you don't need to depend on any earlier record value. So we are directly calculating the output port itself, right? So now, if you want to initiate any value for any particular variable, there is a concept called variables and parameters. There we can do. But any particular port, the default value, if you see here, this can be assigned. Okay, so based on the data type we are declaring here, we need to assign that variable value. Default value. But again, when it comes to the variable ports cannot be given default values. For that, there is a concept called variables and parameters, a separate objects. Those we'll be talking about in the advanced module. Otherwise, for the variable ports, depending on the data type, the default value will be considered. So what are the default values in Informatica? For numeric data types, that means it can be a decimal or integer, whatever it is. For numeric data types, default value is 0. For string data types, it is empty string. And for date data type, it is 1753 January 1st. These are going to be your default values. Okay. So now we are done here. When I click on OK, now you see here in the external interface, do you see the variable port listed out in the column list? No, right? So that was the reason I was mentioning, like, we'll not be able to take out the variable ports directly to be able to map to your downstream object. Right? Why? Because variable ports will not be shown in the column list of your transformation UI. So from here, I'll just map to my downstream objects. Total salary, I'll map into any numeric column. When you're mapping the columns, column names need not to be the same. Okay. You need to make sure column data types are compatible. That means when you're sending a particular column data to any of the target column, the column data type should be compatible. For example, I have a numeric column in the target. If I try to send the character data or string column, obviously integer cannot handle string data, so your job will be failed. So when you are mapping the columns, you need to ensure you are mapping into compatible data types. Right? String can handle integer, but integer cannot handle string. So those basic checks you need to be aware of when you are mapping the columns. Column names need not to be same, but data type should be proper when you are mapping the columns. So we are done here. I saved the mapping and this is valid. So now, in earlier 2 sessions, we have seen that generating a workflow, we are doing that in the manual form, right? Generating the workflow, we are doing a manual activity. That means we are opening the workflow manager, we are creating a session, selecting the mapping, and then we are linking the start object with the session, and then assigning the connection objects and so on, right? All this is manual activity. This all activity can be done with just a couple of clicks, and also that can be done right from within here itself, in the designer itself, even without doing the workflow manager. For the execution of workflow, you obviously have to go workflow manager, but to create your workflow, you can do right from here itself. How do you do that? Is just right click anywhere in your mapping. You see from the context menu last option called generate workflow. So use this option. Go with the third option itself in the first step. The next step is where we'll be assigning the connections. Earlier, where were we assigning the connections? In the session, right? So we'll be doing that here itself. So for the source, pick up the connection list and assign the one. For the target, do the same. And then next, these are going to the names that are going to be assigned to your workflow in the session. If you want to change, you can do that, but it will suggest the names as per the naming standards. See, workflow names are preceded by workflow WF, followed by your mapping name. Session name is prefixed with S, followed by a mapping name. So done. Finally, this is the workflow that is generated successfully. Just click on finish. Now, if you go to Workflow Manager, you will see that workflow readily available for us, so that you can directly execute it. So all that pain that we were taken earlier, following 4 to 5 steps in order to create a workflow, now we were able to do that with just a couple of clicks. Now the session is created with all the default properties. If you wanted to make any customization, right, if you wanted to make any particular changes in session properties, say for example, the target table that I'm loading is having some data, right, which we have loaded in your earlier run. I would like to clear the data and load freshly. So for that, I'd like to enable truncate target table option, which I am enabling it here. Save. And then as you are making some changes to the existing configuration, you need to save it again, and then again make sure it is valid. Now I'll just simply run the workflow. Right, so the load is completed. You can either go to database to look at the data, or I'll show you a shortcut to preview the data. Right click on your target. There is an option called preview. So you need to choose a corresponding connection and then provide your database credentials. So it will pull up the details right from the database. So this is the output data that we generated. Manager column is the one that we populated as your total salary, which is nothing but the summation of these two columns, right? Salary and commission, 16, 3, 19, 12, 5, 17, and so on. And then we populated our count column into department number. You can see it is having 1 to 14. Few of the columns we have not mapped, right? These employee name, job, and all. So those columns populated with nulls, right? Not all the columns are mandatorily need to be mapped, right? So until and unless those are created as not null columns in your table definition at the database level. So that's about it. Expression transformation basically used in order to write any customized transformation logics for your business requirements. Any questions on this one? Do let me know. Right. So next concept is joining. Okay. So the transformation name is joiner transformation. The purpose of this transformation is to join the tables. Concept is pretty much the same concept what we have in the databases level. That is normal join, left outer join, right outer join, full outer join. So used to join sources. Coming to the properties, this is a active transformation and needs to be used only in the connected mode. So why active? Depending on the type of join that you take, the number of output records will be changing, right? Say for example, if it is normal join, it will allow only those records that are having the exact match. Else if it is, so there can be a chance that there will be a decrement in the number of records. And there is your full outer join. Full outer join will do a Cartesian product of both the tables by getting your the count is multiplied. So basically, depending on the type of join, the number of records will be changing. That is the reason this is an active transformation. Now, using a single joiner transformation instance, right? Using one particular joiner transformation instance, you can join only two tables. You can join two sources with a single instance of joiner. In that case, what if I want to join some 4 to 5 tables as part of my requirement? So to join n tables, we need n minus 1 joiners. How is that? Let's take an example. Say for example, I am joining table A and table B using some joiner 1. So the output of J1 is having the joined data of A and B. Right? So if I want to join a third table, what I will do is I will take the output of J1 and I will take the third table, right? I am taking the output of J1 and the third table, give it to another join called J2. So now again into J2 we are giving only two inputs. One is that is coming from J1, another input is of table 3. So the output of J2 will be basically having the joined data of all the 3 tables. Similarly again, if I want to join one more table, let's say I will take joiner 3, into which I will give the output of J2 as well as my 4th table. So if you observe here, in this total join operation, how many tables we are totally joining? 4 tables, A, B, C and D. And how many joiners we have to use? 3 joiners, right? So in order to join n tables, we require n minus 1 joiners. Now, coming to the transformation, the working of joiner transformation. As we see, there are 2 tables participating in a joiner. One table data is first of all completely cached into Informatica server level, and then the second table data is sequentially processed, right? So far we have been saying that record by record processing, it is not exactly record by record processing when it comes to joiner, as we are having 2 tables participating in a transformation. One table data is first of all completely read and kept in the joiner level cache, and then once that cache is available, the second table is your sequentially processed record by record. Okay, so joiner creates cache of the source data. Now, in your joiner transformation, now that we know there are 2 tables participating in a single instance of joiner, for these 2 tables, there are names given as master table and detail table. Okay, one table is called as master and the other one is called as detail. Which is master and which is detail? As I mentioned above, in the 2 tables that are participating in a joiner, one table data is first of all completely read and kept in the cache, and then the second table is what gets your sequentially processed. So the table that is getting cached, that is your master table. Data is cached, whereas detail data is sequentially processed. Okay. Now, how do we make a call which to be master and which to be detail? For better explaining that, let me take a scenario like I have 2 tables, table 1 and table 2. Okay. Table 1 is having some 100 rows, table 2 is having some 10 rows. Now the requirement here is, let's say case 1. I am taking T1 as master and T2 as detail. And then another case we will consider wherein we will consider T1 as detail and T2 as master. So what is the criteria that I said? The table that is considered as master is the one that gets first initially cached completely, and that once caching operation is done, then only your actual data processing will be happening on your detail table. So keeping that in mind, let's capture the statistics. So coming to the first case, I'm considering T1 as master and T2 as detail. So what is the volume of T1? 100 rows. So let's say the initial time that it is taking, integration service is taking to cache T1 data. Let's say 10 minutes. Okay, I'm just giving a number for easier understanding. So 10 minutes is the initial wait in order to do the cache, and once that 10 minutes is done, then only your actual data transformation is happening, actual data processing is going on. So basically the wait time is 10 minutes here, and then at the same time, as this data needs to be stored on the server level in the form of cache files, let's say the server space, the disk space that it requires is 10 MB. Okay, so these are the metrics when we consider T1 as your master table. Now let's capture the same metrics while considering T2 as your master table. So now T2 is having only 10 rows. So in order to cache these 10 rows, I may just need 1 minute in relevance to the earlier example we were talking. At the same time, in order to cache my 10 rows, I just need 1 MB of my server disk space. So in this case, the second case, the initial wait is only for 1 minute. So that means as soon as you kick off your workflow, we were able to start the data processing within 1 minute, right? Or at least right after 1 minute. Whereas in the case 1, we had to wait for 10 minutes in order to even start with the data processing. So in these two cases, which case seems to be more effective? Obviously the second case, because we had to wait for lesser amount of time, and then at the same time we had to spend the least amount possible of server disk space for your caching as well. So in the perspective of performance tuning, it is always advised that you take the table with the less amount of data or the less volume of data as your master table and the other one as your detail table. Alright? So the criteria here is lesser volume is to be considered as master and the other one as detail table. Okay, so this concept is very important, guys. The concept of master and detail. Even in your interviews perspective also, people will definitely ask about the concept of master and detail. They ask about how do you choose which to be your master and which to be detail, and why do you have to choose the table, a certain table as a master and certain table as detail. So you should be able to understand all these concepts, saying that master means that the one that gets cached. In order to spend the less amount of time on the caching activity and the amount of space that needs to be required, it is always advised to take the least amount of the table, a least volume table as your master for the better performance of your job. So that's the concept of joiner. And talking about the types of join, as I mentioned, it is the same types of join what we have in the database level. Just that in the database we call the tables as left table and right table, right? When you are the table that are participating in the join, the table left table and right table. Here, as we name them as master and detail, the naming convention is following like that. So that are normal join, master outer join, detail outer join, and full outer join. Okay, so that's about it. Let's see the data flow for this one as well. So in this example, I'm joining my source and source tables, that is employee and department, because I'd like to have department name column generated for each and every employee. This department name column is not available in my employee table, but is there in department table. So I'd like to join these two. So I'm giving these two inputs into joiner and considering department table as my master table, employee as my a detailed table. Why? Because employee can be having thousands of the records, but department can be having 10 or 50 maximum departments, right? So as department is the lowest volume of data, I'm considering department as master, whereas the employee table as detail. And coming to join criteria, obviously we need to join based on number. So I'm going ahead with this, and the type of join, I'm just taking the normal join. So the criteria of normal joining is the records which are having the exact join will only be coming out. So let's start the mapping. So when we start the mapping, what happens? First, the master data is first completely cached. Let's say this is cached. And once the caching is done, then your detailed table data is processed sequentially. So that means first record is coming from your detailed table, and then it performs a join. So for the join, based on what column you need to join? Based on department number. So for department number 20, it will look in the cache if there is a match. Yes, there is a match here. And then as it is having a match, this record will be going out of your transmission based on normal join. Similarly, next record, again it will check for the existing department number in the cache. So there is no department number found, so null will be returned. And based on our normal join, as this doesn't have an exact match, this will be discarded. And then the next record and so on, right? So 30 means IT, which will have a join, and then it will go to top. So that's how joiner works. The table that is selected as a master table is first completely gets cached into server level, and then your detailed table data is sequentially processed. Let's create a mapping for this one. So this time I'll bring in both the department and employee, and my employee target. So let's create joiner, and into joiner let's map the required columns from both the sources. So from department table I need department number and name. From employee table maybe I just need these and the department number. So now we need to configure our joiner. Let's open the joiner. Ports tab. So here is where you actually select which particular table to be master and which to be detail. You see here there is third column M. So M means you can see the tooltip saying that master if checked, otherwise detail. It also says that master in brackets small, right? So that means you need to consider the table with the small data as master and the other one as detail. By default, you can see the second source that we mapped into joiner is selected as master, but you can change the selection always. So let's say I would like to consider department table as master. So I'll simply select the column, one of the column coming from that source, and the entire selection will be changed. As simple as that, right? How do you switch the master property? Just select one of the column coming from that particular table, and the entire selection will be changed. So I'm selecting my department table as my master source. So I'm taking this one. Next, come to properties tab, wherein you need to choose your type of join. You see there is an attribute called join type. If you pull down the list, you'll be able to identify there are these 4 types of join. Let's go with normal join itself. And then finally, condition tab is where you need to add your join condition. I'll click on this add new condition option and make sure from the list of master table and as well as from the list of detailed table columns, I'll choose the proper column names. So department number, join condition. And again from here to target, you just need to map accordingly. And department name is a string column. So I'll map into the wildcat field I have here, job. Okay, so that's about it. Save, and we'll generate the workflow again with the shortcut method that we have seen. Generate workflow, last option. This time we have two sources and one target. So make sure you assign the connections accordingly. And then the names don't need to change. We are done. Now, we deployed it or created a new workflow. As the workflow manager is already open, we do not have the dynamic refresh option available to be able to see the new workflow that we have created. So what you need to do is just disconnect and connect once to this folder, and then you will now be able to see the new workflow that is created. So just bring it up and make any changes that you want. So I'll simply want to enable truncate target table option. Save, and then I will run. Okay, so 14 records from the employee source, 4 records from the department source. Since all the records are having the exact department number match, so all the records are coming to the target. Let's take a look at the target data. So I'll again go with the preview option on the target, provide the DB credentials. And now you can see we populated job column with the department names, all those populated properly, and we have department number. Okay, so that's joiner transformation. Any questions on this one? Alright, so that's about it. I'll share the exercise file today. You can start practicing it. Hope software is ready with you. Karthik, I think I need to configure it for you. Have you downloaded the VM files that I shared yesterday? Your voice is not audible. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure. You hear me now?
Yeah, but it's too low. It's still.
Yeah, I didn't install it. Have you sent already that software to my email ID?
Yeah, all the details were sent yesterday itself. So you
Okay.
might once.
Yeah, I will check today and let you know if any help is required from your side.
Yeah, you just need to download all the files and make them ready for me to just configure.
Yeah, fine, fine, fine.
So the instructions are given in the mail itself.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Okay. And Raghav, you got the software? All right. Great. Okay, guys. So we'll meet up again tomorrow and discuss about a few things. Once you guys are all set up with the software, and then I'll just speed up the pace. Okay. Thank you. We'll meet tomorrow.